Unitarian Universalists are great at talking about what they do not believe in, especially when it comes to God. I don't believe in a God that, fill in the blank. However you fill in the blank, I guarantee I've heard it about a dozen times or more over the years. I usually hear it from people who have been hurt by a religion where God was strong and a monster and an unloving tyrant, but I've heard it from lots of people regardless of their own situation. Tell me about the God you don't believe in, and they do. And this is nothing new, though, nor is it particularly unique to Unitarian Universalism to describe God by what God is not. Describing what you believe by explaining what it's not has a long history in Western religion. Apophatic mystics, and apophatic from Greek literally means without information or without saying. Apophatics have practiced this type of mysticism as their central spirituality for thousands of years. Apophatic mystics stripped away all description, image, and depiction of God until there was nothing left. Literally, nothing left. Thus, the experience of the apophatic mystic was rooted in a silent, unpersonable, non-communicative God. The apophatics wanted to strip away all presuppositions and human attributes to God and encounter God directly. And their encounter resembled what Mother Teresa would later describe when asked what she does when she prays. She says, I sit and listen to God. And when asked what God says, she says, He mostly sits and listens too. And that's the apophatic experience. So it goes to saying there isn't much left to encounter as an apophatic mystic except the stillness and quiet of all that is. Meditative practices are by their nature apophatic. And this is their great practice, deep, silent reflection, not unlike the practice of Zen. So far this month, as we've reflected on the topic or idea or theme of God, we've been approaching it cataphatically, which, again, from Greek literally, with words, with saying, with information. Cataphatic spirituality and prayer has content. It uses words, images, symbols, metaphors, and all kinds of ideas, not just to describe God, but to communicate with God. And this month we have seen images of the goddess. We have discussed ideas and metaphors about God, such as the ground of all being, the source of all being, a process, an emergent phenomenon. And we've talked about images and ideas that we worship like God, but are not God. All of this, again, very cataphatic, full of information and content, images, depictions, ideas. Apophatic spirituality, however, empties the mind of all these things. Literally without the information, without the images, without the words. The absence of God, naming what God is not. Again, very Unitarian Universalist. Centering prayer is an apophatic practice in the Christian tradition. Sitting meditation in the Buddhist tradition. God is absent, non-existent in atheism by definition, but God is also absent in the theistic tradition, in the tradition of the apophatic mystics. The absence of God is not just for non-believers, but actually a reality deep into and part of the mystic's journey. In her book, Mysticism, Evelyn Underhill defines mysticism this way. Broadly speaking, I understand mysticism to be the innate tendency of the human spirit towards the complete harmony with the transcendental order, whatever be the theological formula under which that order is understood. This tendency in great mystics gradually captures the whole field of consciousness. It dominates their life, and in the experience called mystic union, attains its end. I believe this process to represent the true line of development of the highest form of human consciousness. Underhill notes that in the Western tradition, the mystic's journey goes through a number of evident and common stages: awakening, purgation, illumination, the dark night of the soul, and union. Awakening is waking up to a transcendental reality. It usually is abrupt and well-defined. In some traditions, it can be referred to as a conversion experience. Purgation is the mystic realizing their own limits, their own finitude, their smallness in the scope of the greatness of the universe. And then working to eliminate whatever gets in the way of better perception and understanding of this ultimate reality. And this usually involves working through attachment to things of this world, possessions, things that aren't important, and moving towards a place of non-attachment to these lesser important things. Illumination is the mystic having bouts of understanding, visions, adventures of the imaginative soul, exploring deep theology and study and spiritual practice, finding joy in the practices that make this ultimate reality, this divine or God, alive within them. It does, however, have a shadow side, which is self-absorption, neglecting the realities of life, and feeling that God has singled one out and only speaks through that individual. All of these stages in the mystic's journey are very cataphatic. But the dark night of the soul is the opposite. After illumination, the mystic faces the challenge of the ultimate purgation, giving up the self, the ego, into the vastness of God. God's presence and even understanding at this point seem to flee. Things become meaningless. God truly is encountered as silent, not present. The pleasure of the illumination practices vanish. They seem to dull. They don't seem to work anymore. No matter how much one calls, God does not answer. This was called the path of nothing by St. John of the Cross. Plotinus called it ascent of the alone to the alone. Meister Eckhart called it encountering the God beyond God. When the mystic lives through the dark night of the soul, they arrive into a place of no self and enter into an ineffable, apophatic merging into the ultimate, into God. It is something the mystic finds beyond words to describe. The mystic's journey is not unlike that of the Dharma practitioner in Buddhism. Stephen Batchelor, in his book Buddhism Without Beliefs, reminds us that Buddha was an agnostic. Even though there are many places where one can visit and see people in robes and religious-style dress, wanting rituals and living to an ordered life, Buddhism has no God, although its practice has been institutionalized and more recognized as a religion because of this. Buddha himself taught that one should follow no dogmas, not even Buddhist ones. The Buddha, Batchelor reminds us, made no claims to uniqueness or divinity and did not use a term ever that we would translate God. When asked the big questions, what happens when we die, where do we come from, what's the meaning of this life, Buddha remained silent, agnostic. Buddha taught a middle way between human excess and asceticism. He did not teach a theology, but rather a practice. Sit still and be quiet, and this will be your teacher. Shut up and sit down, and skip right to the apophatic experience. This practice will teach you all you need to know. Buddhism is the practice or the religion of agnosticism. Batchelor says we've lost the force of the word agnosticism in our culture today. It has come to be used by people who don't want to take a side in the atheism-theism debate, that they haven't made up their mind. Batchelor informs us that T.H. Huxley coined the term agnosticism, which means literally not knowing, in 1869, and not as a philosophical stance. Like the Dharma sitting, it was a practice, the practice of reason. Follow your reason as far as it will take you, he wrote, and do not pretend that conclusions are certain which are not demonstrated or demonstrable. Agnosticism, I believe, and not atheism, is the spirituality of science and reason. Humanism, like Buddhism, has been made into a religion without God. Like Buddhism, humanism is more of a practice than a philosophical system. It is the practice of being our best human self, practicing the best human ideals which draw us and call us forward. American religious humanism began as a way for people to practice religion, values, ethics, and get inspiration without needing supernatural belief systems. Counterproductive to the human good, however, is the militant atheist looking down their nose at all the backward religious people. If God doesn't exist, why then get so angry about religion? A pure and even fundamentalist atheism gets hung up on whether or not God is a factual reality, and misses entirely that for most theists, God is about meaning and connection to the universe. A couple of years ago, Sean Illing, a professor at Louisiana State University, published an essay in Salon about the arrogance of the new atheists, in which he writes, "The problem is that the new atheists think of God only in epistemological terms. Consequently, they have nothing to say to those who affirm God for existential reasons. New atheist writers tend to approach religion from the perspective of science. They argue that a particular religion isn't true, or that the empirical claims of religious texts are false. But that's easy to do. The more interesting question is why religions endure in spite of being empirically untrue. There are, of course, millions of fundamentalists for whom God is a literal proposition. Their claims concerning God are empirical and should be treated as such. For many, though, God is an existential impulse, a transcendent idea with no referent in reality. This conception of God is untouched and untouchable by positivist science. Asking if God is real or true in this sense is like asking how much the number 12 weighs. It becomes nonsensical. Atheism always brings me back to John Buren's, former president of the UUA, saying, "Tell me about the God you do not believe in. I probably don't believe in that God either." The angry old man in the sky is an easy target. I don't know of a serious theologian, contemporary or from the classical tradition, who ever argued for the reality of this God. It's the God that is ineffable, beyond words, silent, absent, that fascinates the theologian and me. Counterintuitive though it may be, there is a lot to be learned from a silent and absent God. When all is stripped away, we are left, like the apophatic mystics, with our own embodied person connected to the universe. But the universe contains multitudes, and so do we.